So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, from a quasi-empty Gare Maritime in Brussels. It shows even more that we are in the midst of a global crisis that has severe consequences for people around the world. So this year there are no visitors at G-STIC and I'm talking into a mic for an empty studio. I hope you're quite numerous for attending this session, the deep dive on the future of ports and energy hubs. And it's my firm opinion that we need to rebuild our economies so that they can provide us with jobs and society that is secure, resilient and safe. But how can we then minimize the harmful effects of climate change? As I said, we want to build a resilient society that can withstand and adapt to this ever-changing environment that impacts the lives of every inhabitant of our world, be it human, animal, or vegetal, or other. And we can respond decisively to this change. We have the means and the access to technology to do this. But in order to do that, we have to acknowledge as a society that we have a problem. As the saying goes, the first road to recovery is to acknowledge that you have a problem. And we have to acknowledge now that we have become addicted to a continuous supply of cheap, abundant energy, whilst disregarding at the same time the impact on society and the world we live in. We need to acknowledge that this source of energy, fossil fuels, has limits, and that the quest for an ever-growing society, dirigated by humans and based on an unlimited supply of cheap energy, is over. This doesn't mean, in my opinion, that we have to turn a blind eye to everyday's reality. It's all too easy for industrial countries that have fueled their growth over the last century and a half by those same fuels to now start making amends by imposing restrictions on countries in way of development, and thus deny them the economic growth with all its associated benefits for their country. What is needed is a change of course, and as a former shipmaster, I can assure you that radical changes of course are only a maneuver of the last resort. Because you know that when you order the wheel to put hard over, what is going to happen, but you have no clue what the impact on your vessel and on your crew might be afterwards. So, if climate change comes, and if we want to work toward it, then we need to work on decarbonization, and that will largely take place on land. 87% of the total will be based on land-based infrastructure and production of alternative fuels. And no country in the world, not even North Korea, can live in a state of autarky. New forms of protectionism, exacerbated by COVID-19, are hampering the free flow of goods and ideas that are crucial to answering the challenges of our times. It is now the time to act decisively. And the ports and shipping industry, with its consumption of more than 4% of the global oil demand, is the most iconic battlefield. If change at a global scale starts somewhere, then it's here, in the industry that binds us all together. Let's do it, and let's do it now. And allow me to return to my shipmaster analogy. Every captain knows that there is a point in time in which you have to commit to your change of course, lest you run aground or face disaster. That moment, ladies and gentlemen, is now. I'm very much looking forward to this session, the deep dive on future of ports and energy hubs. And I would like to introduce our first speaker, who is Piet Opstaele, who is the Innovation Enablement Manager for the Port Authority of the Port of Antwerp. Piet, you have the floor.
Thank you, Marc. Good afternoon, everybody. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here and to provide you with a presentation on the vision and the strategy, but also some examples how we are building the port of the future as an energy port. Maybe a short introduction for the people who are not from Belgium and surroundings. Where is the port exactly located? So it's a big port in a small country. We are about 80 kilometers inland. You see it on the right below. It's a port which is import and second largest in Europe. About more than 200 million tons of freight are passing there every year. But what's also important is the size. It's 120 square kilometers, so it's one of the largest port areas in the world. We have almost 1,000 companies which are active on that platform, and every day more than 60,000 people are coming to work in the port itself. A few years ago, and like Marc indicated, it were challenging times and exciting times. So at that moment, with our new CEO coming in, Jacques van der Meere, a new mission was posted, positioned as home port vital for a sustainable future. And I think having a leverage function as a port authority is crucial in having that sustainable transformation and transition which is necessary in the coming years. We have 5 strategic priorities defined on mobility, on sustainable growth, meaning not only more land use, but also better land use, safety and security, operational excellence, and for sure also energy and digital transition. Why is energy so important? The Port of Antwerp is the world's second largest chemical hub, and it's an important energy hub. So a lot of steam is used within the chemical processes. Coming to a more low carbon economy is a crucial strategic objective for us. Good. The SDGs, we introduced that, I think, in the meantime, 2-3 years ago. You know, there are 17 of them. That's a lot. But we have chosen 5+1 focus SDGs where we would like to, it will be for next year, where we would like to reach Olympic gold. And it's about climate action, it's about innovation, it's about sustainable communities, and of course also partnerships. I'm coming back on that. Maybe a first view on our vision in the energy transition. So we see our ultimate goal is to have a low carbon sustainable industrial cluster by 2050. Okay, that's still 30 years ago, but we need to start working on that today, and we are doing that. And there we defined quite some actions in 3 big programs. One is on sustainable energy, so increasing the energy efficiency, but also developing, and I think very important, new energy systems, for instance, green hydrogen supply chain. The second one is sustainable industry. I mentioned there is a large chemical hub, so developing new feedstocks, new material systems, stimulate innovation in that environment, or important actions. Antwerp is an important bunkering port in the world, the 5th largest. Also there, having the transition to more sustainable forms of energy for shipping is an important element. And the difficult one is the last one. It's about digital transition in the energy market. I see today that digitalization is still only emerging in that market. So there is still a lot of improvement on that area. Good. I will not go in full detail here, but this is a representation of our sustainable energy program. The Port of Antwerp has today the largest onshore windmill park. We are building a power-to-methanol plant. And the first hydrogen tugboat is currently in construction. The motor has been announced a couple of weeks ago. It's in a joint venture between CMB and ABC, a company from Ghent. The company is called B Hydro. So by mid of next year in Antwerp, the first hydrogen-driven tugboat will be sailing. These are some of the highlight projects. Another important one maybe to mention also is a steam network. Like mentioned, a lot of steam is used. We have Indaver, which is burning waste, and they produce a lot of energy. So currently on the left bank, there is a whole network built where steam is created, and which is shared between different other companies. Hydrogen for us, green hydrogen, is a key program. And we see that in 3 areas, on production, on transport distribution, and consumption. First of all, in production, within the chemical industry in Antwerp, there is a significant production of hydrogen. Second, we are currently building the first power-to-methanol demo plant, coming back to that. On transportation and distribution, you know, ports historically has always been centers, hubs of transport and distribution. That's the main reason for existence of ports. So building that new supply chain where green hydrogen is transported from other areas in the world, where it is in a sustainable way by wind or solar energy produced on a large scale, then transported by ship to Antwerp or Zeebrugge, and then is distributed to the European network. That's a very important ambition we have. Maybe hydrogen will not be a main form of energy on a global level in the future, but at least it will take a significant part. And Port of Antwerp would like to play a major role in building that supply chain. Consumption, like mentioned, shipping is an important energy consumer, so also there, as soon as possible, we should make the transition. Why? Because the ships which are built today will be sailing still within 20 years. So if we would like to reach a low emission environment, maybe zero by 2050, we should start acting now. Some examples, power to methanol. Methanol is an attractive form of any energy carrier because of the safety reasons, because of the compressed size, and for sure it can also be valid for shipping. So we are currently start building in a cooperation with 6 other companies, NG is there, Oil Tanking, Indaver, Flemish government. We are building a large-scale demo plant for this, which will become operational within 18 months. A second important topic is high trucks. It's one of the projects, and there you see, that's nice, that also competing ports are working together. So it's a large project also coordinated by Air Liquide, where the target is to have by 2025 1,000 heavy-duty fuel cell trucks on the European roads, and where there are 25 refueling stations should be present. Also in the context of the Green Deal, there are very clear targets that by 2025 road trucks needs to make that transition to zero emission. To mention very near our beautiful port house in Antwerp, currently CMB is building there a large-scale hydrogen station which can be used both for cars, trucks and ships. So here you see graphics of our first hydrogen tugboat. It will be 85% hydrogen feeded and 15% still diesel. but the next generation will be then 100% hydrogen. So being a multi-fuel port is a second main largest target for us. Looking to the regulation on that on a global level, more and more zones are indicated as kind of low emission zones on sea. In Europe, we have the ECA, which is there already for several years. So there are strict regulations on the emissions which can be done by ships. Second is, if we look to Antwerp, we are the 5th largest bunkering port in the world after Rotterdam, Singapore, and so on. And if you see also what the energy consumption will be in the coming 10 years, it will today, or in 2018, it was 253 million ton. It will increase further in the coming 5 to 10 years. But then you will see that by 2050, the energy use for shipping will decrease. And one of the main drivers is their improved energy efficiency, of course. Within that context, you see that there is a clear move on more sustainable forms of energy. And okay, you can discuss on it, but LNG for sure has certain advantages. And here you see some very recent figures, beginning of October, beginning of this month actually, referring to the different ship types. And it's clear that in the cruise business, there is already an important transition ongoing to zero emission or to LNG ships. But also in the container business, you see today that there are about 50 larger container ships are sailing based on LNG, and that another 50 are in building or ready to do that. I think for shipbuilders, it's a difficult period because it's like buying today a new car. Which form of energy you should choose? LNG, CNG, electricity. I think in the shipping industry, we are probably in a similar situation. But anyhow, I think LNG will have its position in time and in history, and it will be probably a transition form of energy. In Antwerp already in 2015, we start providing LPG carriers. In February this year, we have also the first one who is doing bunkering to the shore. And there you see the small statistics of the increased use of LNG bunkering in the port of Antwerp. I think by end of this year, we should reach about 2,000 ton, which is, okay, not yet that large volume. So coming back to the Port Authority, we have different roles in that to facilitate and speed up and accelerate the transition. First of all, as a regulator, be sure that the system is safe, because bunkering LNG or hydrogen is from a different order to very common old gas oil. We need locations for that. Where can you bunker or not? And we need operational safety, so that also all people and material involved in this can be bunkered in a safe way. A second large one in that transition is our role as landlord, where we recently announced and opened a new large area where companies working on circular economy and future energy forms can do testing, build their pilots installation and demonstration sites. It's called our next-gen district. And last but not least, a very important role we have is being a community builder. And here you see some examples of the major programs we are working on to help facilitating that energy and climate transition. And also here, for instance, hydrogen is an important one, where with some large companies like DEME, ENGIE, the Port of Zeebrugge, Exmar, Fluxys, we are building that green hydrogen supply chain. This was my story, Marc. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Piet. And for those attending the session, you can also ask questions to the chat. And I think we already have some questions, Anne?
Yes, that's correct. Rob Stair has asked for Piet, does the port have an on-site waste-to-energy plan for waste brought from ships, especially to keep post-COVID waste from entering local landfills? Is handling post-COVID waste from other countries even a consideration to the port?
I think waste from ships, and there is a lot of regulation and obligations on that. We have several locations in the port where ships can post their waste in several fractions and forms. So I think that's running. Also there, indeed, COVID-sensitive material is currently separated. And keep in mind that in Antwerp we have one of the largest industrial installations where COVID waste is burned. So Indaver is there a big, even European player in this.
Faces being landfilled?
No, I think none.
None.
As far as I know, none.
Certainly not. Yeah. Okay, I think there's no other questions at this moment. So we could move to the next speaker.
Well, for those who are still watching, you can also ask, or you put your questions on the chat and we can also handle them during the panel debate after all the speakers. And then I have the pleasure now to introduce the next speaker who will attend us from the Netherlands, Marjolein van Noort. Marjolein is a policy officer of the Royal Dutch Shipowners Association, but also the coordinator of the European Network of Maritime Clusters. Marjolein, you have the floor.
Many thanks and good afternoon to all of you. After half a year, it still feels strange not to see you, because I would like to have some interaction. So all the questions you have, please put them in the chat. I think Anne will guide us through that. And I would like to talk about something slightly different than the previous speaker, but it's definitely connected. I will share my screen. And there you go. What I would like to talk about is what if we could start tomorrow? Because we work with an industry that has been there for ages, has quite some knowledge, but we have an infrastructure and it's based on old principles. And you can't say something for those, you can say something for those old principles, but they won't serve us in the long run in the future. So let's imagine that there's a blank page and you can start tomorrow. How would you develop the infrastructure of the future? What would you do with the vessels that sail in and out of ports? And what can we do with that knowledge? Because then we would probably design our vessels different. The European Network of Maritime Clusters is a combination of shipbuilders, ship owners, it's the fishery, it's the ports, it's the whole set of the entire maritime cluster. Well, keep that image in mind that we could start tomorrow. And then I go to the ocean economy. And whether it's too big to save or too big to fill. I'm an economist, I'm a trained economist. I started my career at the Ministry of Finance. And if you look at the ocean, it's all of us and it's from nobody. And that might make the ocean difficult to, well, we can't let it fill, but apparently it's also a difficult one to save because you can't divide the ocean into pieces. So cooperation in the whole maritime value chain is connected. So if we're speaking about a zero-emission waterborne transport system, that only can be done with the ports, with the shipbuilders, the ship owners, and we need to speak about what kind of technologies can serve us in the future. Because we're all going to sail those oceans and those seas. If we look at the industry, it's a critical one. And I'm coming from the industry, so I might be biased. But the industry, it ensures the supply of cargo, and it includes food, it includes raw materials. Within Europe, if you look at waterborne transport, it's approximately 40% of all modalities. And worldwide, it's even more. If you think about the wind farms, the offshore wind farms, you can't have the offshore wind farms without the maritime industry. Well, and the other thing, and living in the Netherlands, it's the key thing. Without the maritime industry, I wouldn't have dry feet because we need land to protect. So the ocean, is it too big to save? It's definitely too big to let it fill. Coming from that blank sheet, how do we develop new vessels, new ports, and what if we could start tomorrow? Lucky us, we have lots of expertise, but there is an urgency to start today in developing new technologies and also make sure that our financing and our innovation money goes to the new economy. You probably recognize the picture. This would be a moment if I would be standing somewhere and I could see you, I would ask you what the picture is, but you probably recognize it as the Oosterlinck. And it's quite a piece of work. But the Oosterlinck was only there after quite a big disaster in the 50s. But this is what we can develop as a world. We can develop something so strong that it protects our country, our land, from the water in a sustainable way. So what do you need for that? You need to dare to do something different than we did yesterday. The other lucky thing we have, I think, is that we have all the pieces of the puzzle, except for one, I think. If you look at the cooperation in ports, you see here the Port of Rotterdam during the port days. We have a good port infrastructure in Europe. We have smart shipbuilders. We have ship owners that dare to sail the vessels of the future. We are developing new technologies. We can have a discussion on LNG, on CCS, on CCU. We're talking about methanol, about hydrogen. So it is being developed, sometimes in a very early stage, but we're starting. And the other thing, the picture at the right, for me it's the right, is of the Technical University of Delft. And I think if we look at the knowledge we have in Europe, we have bright minds that can develop the maritime industry of the future and making sure we decarbonize. So what is the missing puzzle, the piece of the puzzle? I would say it's long-term funding for innovative deals and instruments that cover the whole maritime value chain. If we look at an article of The Guardian, and it's of last year, we can easily find one of this here, but this one I thought was touching upon what I wanted to say. The financial sector must be at the heart of tackling climate change. What does that mean? If we have an innovative deal and it's very sustainable, it's probably also pretty risky because it's new technology. If you look at the financial institutes, they would like to de-risk what they finance. So there might be a catch-22 here. The Green Deal in the maritime industry of the future is a bit risky, but is very promising for our decarbonized future. Can we find banks that dare to tackle those risks? Going from the financial sector to another point in economics. If you look at the size of the blue economy, the size of the ocean economy, it's incredible. We are now looking for a shift from the current industry to financing the new industry. And the promising outlook is that the opportunity is big. If we start thinking about what could we do within that blue economy, and it's not only offshore wind, but it's the whole set. It could make sure that we have the jobs of the future, that we have a thriving European economy. And liquidity is not our issue. That's, well, if you look at the money available, look at the pension funds, look at, and a big compliment to the European Commission and all the cabinets around Europe, there is a European Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is approximately 600-700 billion in total. That's the facility that could push the green future. So it's there. We have the European Investment Bank, also seen as the Climate Bank of Europe, and we're talking a lot about green bonds. So we have enough money to finance the green maritime industry. How do we do that? What is blocking the flow of capital? If you agree with me, because I think the missing piece of the puzzle is the financing in this part. And what we see is that regulation is often focused on the old, on what we know, which makes sense, but regulation should be based on what we also need. 2008, we had a difficult time around the world because we were in a crisis. And regulation these days is based on the previous crisis. So we need to look forward, because regulation today is blocking the financing of innovative companies. The other thing, and that's an interesting one, we know what's happening. If you have a safe vessel today and it's built in a modern way, that's something that is known. What we're talking about, as the previous speaker did as well, about new technology. What do we know from that? What do we know about the risk? What do we know about the opportunities? Think about 3D printing. What is the material behavior? What is the future value of what we today think as really modern and really forward-looking? Is the vessel somebody builds today, is it going to be a new one in 10 years' time? And if we look at a corporation, it's probably more than one party taking the risk. So it's not only the shipbuilder that's trying something new, it's also the ship owner, and the port needs to invest in infrastructure. Then we come to the gap between short-term funding and long-term projects. I think every project in the maritime industry, especially the ones that are about decarbonizing, are long-term projects. And if you look at the financing we have available, it's often short-term. So that's a difficulty. Well, and then we come to the last one. It's more a philosophical one. But what is sustainable enough? What is European enough? And what is strategic enough? I'll keep that in mind, and maybe I get the answers from you. To make sure that liquidity, the money that is available, comes to the maritime industry and make sure that we invest in the technologies of the future, we need to see innovation as a process and not as an end result. We need to think about transition. We need to think about LNG, about CCS and CCU, and we also need to invest in hydrogen, methanol, etc. So I come to the solutions. Value technologies that enhance the transition. We won't go from 2020 to 2050 in once. So the vessels built tomorrow, the port infrastructure invested in tomorrow, it also takes into account the transition and make sure that those investments are safe enough and seen as safe. One I would like to hear your opinion about, but I'm going to say mine. I think we need a new role of the government. If you look at the private sector and private financing, it's there, but we also need the government to step in to make sure that the long-term horizon is safeguarded. We cannot ask from companies and banks to have a horizon that goes beyond 5 years. That's too far away for the private sector. So guarantees and a blending of public and private financing serves the decarbonization of the maritime cluster. Then the thing I'm thrilled about is that we need to get all the knowledge on board. And now sometimes we think in silos, we think in the various parts of the industry, but why not invite the startups in a board, the young people in a board of directors? Why not test your new project with NGOs? I might be saying scary things, but I like to have the criticism. heard. Make regulation future-proof. I spoke about that earlier. Make sure that you define risk well. You can define risk as a non-performing loan. You can also define risk as make sure that we still have a planet and live on it. And the last one, stimulate long-term funding and design new business models. So with that, I conclude. If we want a sustainable maritime future, we need to dare to invest in the unknown. And this links to the picture I started with. Think of it as a blank sheet. What would we do? And I think we're lucky because we have loads of expertise and there is liquidity and there's the innovation coming around. Thank you.
Thank you, Marjolein. And are there questions for Marjolein?
Yes, there is a question from...
See if there are any questions.
Yes, from, I'll pick one out. It's one from Pieter Parmentier, and he asks if there are some guidelines we could share on how to distribute the financial risks between the public and the private sector if it comes to the ocean economy. So, sharing risk between private and public entities. Do you have any thoughts on that?
You were muted the first part of the question, so sorry. But
Sorry, I will repeat. It's a question on the financing. Do you have guidelines on how to share the risk, the financial risk, between the public and the private sector in the ocean economy?
I think the short answer is no. However, we have interesting examples if you look in the world of ECAs, export credit agencies, because they have been involved in long-term transactions, private and public. But we need to work on the risk sharing. I think what you can ask from a government is to take up a part of the risk. So the not knowing what a technology might do in the long run. What you should ask from the private partners is to take up the risk they can take. So that's the entrepreneurial risk.
Okay.
Marjolein, I found it an interesting concept, but I thought it was a piece of the puzzle missing, and maybe you could comment on that. I mean, I think it must be perfectly possible to establish a large coalition of leading institutional investors. But the big driver behind that would be, what role are the charterers going to play in this? Because actually they are in the driving seat. It's not the ship-owning community that's in the driving seat. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah. And a very interesting question. It's going to be a longer answer than just 2 words. I think the difficulty is, and that's one of the first slides I started with, is that we are all in the driver's seat. With my perspective from working for ship owners, if we look at the charters being in a driver's seat, that would mean that we couldn't do anything. So to solve this enormous puzzle we have, it's working together. It's making sure that we have longer-term contracts. It's making sure that a bank dares to finance a 15-year contract of a very innovative new vessel. So I think it's more layered than you say, and they definitely play a role, but it's not the only party.
Well, I was just referring to that big charterers coalition that was started 2 weeks ago. I think it's an interesting concept because actually the charterers represent the consumer. And the consumer has maybe a very big interest in driving new technology, and especially when we talk about decarbonization. Anyhow,
there it would be interesting, if I may react, to really bring what we transport back to in the consumer's mind. Because now it's sometimes difficult to see how you can get something in your house, apartment, that has been transported in a green manner. I don't know that. It's a question I often ask to the parties I order something from. but we don't always know.
Well, it can't maybe be that difficult if the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund has decided not to invest in weapons, in fossil fuel transactions. Well, any leading pension fund can make a coalition with a few other institutional investors and saying, we do not fund shipping companies that do not decarbonize fast enough.
Yes, and would they be willing to pay more for green transport?
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to cost more.
Are there more questions, or would you like to go to the following?
And are there any more
there's
questions?
no. We will stop because we have to continue with our program. But do keep asking questions in the chat. We are following that up, and we can maybe use some of the questions also in the debate later on. But now we have to thank Marjolein and go to the next speaker. I think.
And we move to Nathalie Oosterlinck, who is heading DEME Concessions, the offshore wind and renewable participations of the DEME group. Good afternoon, Nathalie.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. I will try to share my screen so we can get started. It would have been better if we would all have been able to be there in person, but yes, unfortunately, this is not the case. I hope everybody is seeing my full screen at the moment.
We see all the slides. We don't see the full screen yet.
No, it doesn't transfer to the full screen, apparently. Still not. Apologies for this. Apparently my computer doesn't allow me to share my complete screen in Zoom.
A clear case of computer says no. Let's move on then, Nathalie, unless we lose too much of your valuable time.
Yes.
Yes, or you take the next one and I try to solve this and then I come back, if that's okay?
No, I think I'm not entirely sure whether the next speaker is already ready, so maybe you can just move on, Nathalie.
Okay.
As long as we can see what's on the slides, it will be okay.
Yes, okay, that's perfect. So good afternoon, everybody. I work for DEME. Some of you may know DEME already. Some of you may not. DEME is a world leader in marine engineering and in highly specialized fields of dredging and solutions for the offshore energy market. We have several activity lines. We are active in dredging, offshore, environmental infrastructure. We also have DEME Concessions, who is an active investor in especially renewable and infrastructure projects, and GSR. Yeah, my screen is completely blocked. I don't know how we should do this. Apologies about that. Yeah, everything is blocked here. Sorry. I will try to do it this way.
Yours.
So dredging, I will go through this pretty fast. Of course, offshore and offshore wind. DEME started in offshore wind more than 12 years ago. At this moment, I think we have more than 1,000 people active in offshore wind at this moment, all over the world. Environmental, active in environmental dredging, soil remediation, water treatment, sediment treatment, and landfill techniques. Marine infrastructure, lots of civil marine engineering work, foundation works, port constructions, breakwater harbor, dams, for example, also the Fehmarn Belt tunnel between Denmark and Germany. And then we go do DEME concessions. DEME concessions is an investor and a solutions provider. We are active as an early stage investor, especially in large scale projects, mainly within Europe at this moment, but also with a global horizon. We have 4 activities or activity lines we target, being renewables, infrastructure, then marine resources, and newly added hydrogen, which we will come to later. Sustainability is of extreme importance for a company as DEME. DEME's vision is really to work towards a sustainable future by offering solutions for global challenges. We are very active in this, and we really believe in this. We also have the sustainability goals, which we follow and implement in the way we work. And then if you see offshore energy or offshore wind, up until now, offshore energy was mainly focused at offshore wind, but we would like to be a bit more broad as it is. The world of offshore energy has gotten a bit more broader than only offshore wind. And actually look forward on what is the new frontier. Offshore wind has become extremely big, has become a vital player in the energy market globally today. What are the challenges that lie ahead of us, and what are also the opportunities that lie ahead of us? If you look at DEME and DEME Offshore, this is a view of all of the turbines that were installed by DEME Offshore up until last year. So as you see, DEME has really been at the forefront of the offshore wind development, and it is really our intention to go much further than where we have come so far. If we look at Belgium, which is of course our territory here, DEME is a Belgian company, although we have a very global view. The first offshore wind concession area in Belgium will be fully developed by the end of 2020. I have been myself active in the development and the construction of some of these offshore wind farms. And in this respect, Belgium will be in the fourth place in the world in terms of installed power. We are a very, very small country, but that doesn't really matter if you can compete on a global level. The next phase of offshore wind in Belgium, the Belgian government aims for a total of 4,000 up until 6,000 megawatts of total offshore wind by 2030. And this is actually the zone on the left that is new to be developed. Now, if you look at the offshore wind projects and the offshore wind farms of the future, it is going to take a different turn and is going to look quite a bit different than before. If you see here, this is a visual which was on the front page of The Guardian in September 2008, which is already more than 12 years ago. And this is Greenpeace's grid plan, where they mention that the North Sea grid could bring wind power to over 70 million homes. In Europe, we have a vast amount of wind energy available within the North Sea, which is the ideal location for the production of renewable energy. And this is really the future of the North Sea. If you look at this visual, it was drawn 12 years ago, but it's still very actual. Unfortunately, it has taken a bit of time to get here, but this is how we, as DEME and lots of people in the sector, actually see the future of offshore energy in Europe. It's really offshore energy and energy hubs and interconnection. This is a visual from the North Sea wind power hub. As for the Belgians among you, you will see that there is no line going to Belgium, which of course is something that needs to be tackled. This is a project where Belgium is not involved in, but there are lots of other projects coming about in the next few years. Where is Belgium involved in, and what is very important going forward also in Europe? The North Seas countries Offshore Grid Initiative was started by a cooperation agreement in 2010. And this has really gone through an entire evolution of a lot of countries talking together with each other and seeing where collaboration could actually lead to new developments, more efficiency. And in 2016, this has been transferred into the North Seas Energy Corporation. Now, the North Sea Energy Corporation is a regional energy corporation between Belgium, Germany, Denmark, France, Ireland, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, and Sweden. And it is really meant to facilitate the integration of large-scale offshore wind in the European energy market and try to go to a more coordinated grid approach. The last 10, 15 years were really about maturing offshore wind and developing offshore wind projects on their own. The next 10 to 15 years will be focused, we think, on hybrid hub approaches. On the left-hand side, you see the historical approach. So every project has its own connection to the grids, separately going to its own country, its own region. Now you see there was a communication by Elia in Germany, 50 Hertz, which installed a hybrid connector connecting one of the projects in Denmark to one of the projects in Germany. And this is really what we think is going to happen going forward in the North Sea. This visual shows a Dutch plan for a wind farm island in the North Sea. And also in Denmark, the government has decided that they want to install 2 energy hubs, one island which already exists in the Baltic, and one new artificial island that they want to build in the North Sea, which is really going to be a energy and electricity hub, but not only electricity, but also green molecules, and combine and interconnect with other countries. If you look at DEME itself, our project of the multifunctional islands, which was planned just for the coast, for the Belgian coast. This is really a starting point of what an energy hub or an energy interconnection island can be. It can have a multitude of activities on that island, going from a logistical hub for offshore wind or something else, energy storage and balancing. Here you see a tidal energy island. You can use energy hubs at sea for hydrogen transport, hydrogen storage, green molecules coming from countries where green energy is less expensive to produce. Also aquaculture and multi-use. And then looking forward, offshore energy and hydrogen. This is really something we believe in, and as you know, also the European Commission believes in it. To be able to transfer solar and wind energy, renewable energy, and create that surplus of renewable energy into green molecules. And these green molecules can be used into hard-to-abate sectors such as heavy-duty transport or the chemical industry, which we have a lot of in Western Europe, of course. And in hydrogen, everybody talks about hydrogen, but it's very important for us to make a difference between production of offshore wind within the North Sea, where you could potentially have production of electricity, but also production of hydrogen, which would mean balancing and storage capacity of that energy, and also transport and import of hydrogen, as my colleague from the Port of Antwerp also mentioned, where green molecules will be produced in the coming years in countries where there is a lot of solar and wind power, and then will be imported into in order to become climate neutral by 2050, we will need an enormous amount of greenhouse gas emission avoidance. And in that respect, hydrogen can, according to us, play a vital role there. What is also important is the pioneering demonstration projects.
Nathalie, sorry, I think we're running out of time, so if you could come to a conclusion, then thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
So we schedule a hydrogen demonstration project in Ostend, and coming to the conclusion, key challenges, which are of course opportunities, is interconnection between countries, regions, and energy production hub, creation of these hubs, green energy and green molecules, and get innovative demonstration projects into Europe. I thank you very much.
It is us who have to thank you, Nathalie. Do we have time maybe for one small question for Nathalie?
There is one question. It's not directly related to your presentation, Nathalie, but I think it's an interesting question. DEME and also other companies in the maritime sector, they think that the sustainable development goals are really important. There are certification schemes for sustainability. And there is Laurent Flake who asks if these sustainability certification schemes are being used, is there then a role for NGOs in the external audit that is required for the certification? Don't know if you have experience with that, with audits for certification, and if NGOs take part of that, or what's your opinion on that, Nathalie?
Personally, I have no experience with that, so I cannot really comment on it in all fairness.
As I often say to my kids, no is also an answer. Thank you very much, Nathalie. You're absolutely right. I think without much further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I think we should go to the last speaker. Nathalie, please hang on, because we will need you for the panel, which will be short, and I would like to give the floor to, voilà, there he is, Laurent. Laurent Remy is working for Fluxys, Belgium, as a spokesperson and social media manager. I think he's very much, well, I think he's very much involved into public affairs, where he helps people understand, especially decision makers, to understand the role of gas in the energy transition. So, Laurent, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. So in the interest of time, I will quickly go to slide number 2, which explains actually who we are very briefly. So we are a Belgian company, but we have spread our tentacles a little bit over Europe, I would say, over last. And we have become now an international player active in the midstream segment in approximately 10 countries over Europe. We have opened recently an office in Singapore, and we are planning to open one shortly in Brazil. So our midstream activities are based on 3 main pillars. We are moving gas through pipeline transmission. We are storing, putting gas in the underground. So we have a storage in an aquifer here in the northeastern part of Belgium. And of course, we are active on LNG terminaling. We own and operate the Zeebrugge LNG terminal on the Belgian coast. But we have as well a participation in Dunkirk in France and in Revitusa terminal in Greece. So you see that through our LNG terminaling activities, I would say that maritime activities and ports are subjects which are very close to our heart. So the good point about the Green Deal is that it confirms a rationale for gas infrastructure. So with the Green Deal, the EU has really, I would say, they want to bring things forward towards a carbon neutral EU by 2050. And recently they have published 2 important communications, one about the integration of the energy systems, which recognizes that actually full electrification is no silver bullet when it comes to get to a good energy mix by 2050. And another point is the hydrogen strategy that we will look a little bit more into. So the idea by 2050 is to have an energy mix composed of 50% electricity, roughly speaking, but besides that, we will need molecules. What are those molecules? There are several of them, but biofuels, biomethane, and hydrogen will surely make part of the energy mix, knowing that for us, it's important to say that a successful story in terms of energy mix is that the energy mix must be carbon neutral, it's obvious, but you need as well an energy system which ensure a high security of supply, as is the case today, and a system which is affordable as well. Moving on to next slide, we think that gas infrastructure is key. So we know accommodate natural gas, of course, as a low carbon energy system in comparison to other fuels, but we definitely are willing to allow a shift into zero carbon energy carriers. So I will quote 2 of them: biomethane market, which is a market in full development. So a few weeks ago, we have commissioned the first biomethane injection into both distribution and transmission grid. Carbon capture and utilization, carbon capture and storage are very important, as well as carbon sinks if we want to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. But today we will focus on hydrogen and hydrogen market developments. So the idea is to start, I would say, at a small scale with industrial clusters, moving on to larger scale projects like transmission and storage. So how can we produce hydrogen? I think it's important to put things into perspective. You have heard the words green hydrogen already today. But here I think it's necessary to do a quick recap of what is green hydrogen. So most hydrogen, more than 95%, which is used in the world, is called gray hydrogen. Gray hydrogen because it's produced out of a process called steam methane reforming, whereby natural gas is cracked into its two constituents, hydrogen and carbon. And in the presence of oxygen, it will give you CO2, reason why it's called gray. If you add a carbon capture system, you will produce blue hydrogen. If you produce, thanks to an electrolysis process, you transform wind and solar energy into actually hydrogen and oxygen, then you get what we call the green hydrogen. Another term often used is yellow hydrogen, when the power which is necessary to do the electrolysis is coming from nuclear plants. And then, but it's still under construction, you have the turquoise hydrogen, which is obtained by a pyrolysis process. The good thing about that one is that you convert natural gas into hydrogen and solid carbon instead of CO2. So if we now move on to next slide, I know we are really talking about a concrete project that we are currently working on together with partners from the Colruyt Group, a Belgian company. We are currently envisaging to build the first power to gas installation at industrial scale in Belgium. So the idea really with this Eye of Wind project, it's to kickstart hydrogen, but to kickstart as well knowledge building around hydrogen in Belgium. So what are we going to do? We will take advantage of wind power, which will be generated by our partners Eolie and Parkwind. They have wind parks in the North Sea, as you know, and through electrolysis we will obtain green hydrogen that will be used to supply the industry, for instance, by means of tube trailers. But it is envisaged as well to inject hydrogen into our gas grid, which is our expertise in this particular project. So Zeebrugge was, I would say, an ideal location from the beginning because it's both a gas and electricity hub. So if you look at the throughput capacity of the Zeebrugge region, as far as gas is concerned, we can move approximately 10% of the gas which is needed to supply the whole of Europe. So it's definitely an ideal place to flow huge quantities of green hydrogen into the grid. And on the electricity side, as you know, Zeebrugge is a landing point for green electricity coming from offshore wind parks. There is a link with the UK. There is the modular offshore grid as well. So it's really an ideal location. Our planning is to reach a final investment decision in the coming weeks and to have a facility up and running by 2023. Another project we are pretty much involved in for the time being is what we call a Belgian hydrogen backbone we would like to build. So we are talking about Horizon 2035, 2040 of a network of 1,200 kilometers interconnected network in Belgium with interconnections to the Netherlands, to France, to Germany, and why not to the UK through the interconnector pipeline. We are not working alone on this topic. We are working together with European colleagues through a project called as European Hydrogen Backbone. I recommend you all to go on Google and to look for some additional information. Everything is available on the website of European Hydrogen Backbone. The idea is to reuse as far as possible the existing infrastructure to develop a network of something a little bit less than 7,000 kilometers of pipeline by 2030, and to have, I would say, to reach ideally 23,000 kilometers of pipeline by 2040. I think this was already discussed briefly by my colleague from DEME, but Fluxys is part of a very important project called Hydrogen Import Coalition, because what the project encompasses is actually the way we could import, transport, store hydrogen in the long run, because we know that even though the EU is really it's a strong ambition in terms of hydrogen, it's obvious that there is not enough green hydrogen neither in Belgium nor in Europe as a whole to cover the demand. So the idea here is to import hydrogen, green hydrogen, from other countries when there is a lot of wind and a lot of sun. So this is my last slide. We are definitely paving the way for future energy carriers. We are involved in power to gas, in hydrogen import, in hydrogen backbones. We are working on projects, amongst others, with the Port of Antwerp for carbon capture and utilization and storage. We are working on heat recovery. We encourage the injection of biomethane into our network. And I would say, last but not least, we talk the talk and we walk the walk, because we have the ambition to reduce our own CO2 emissions by half in 2025, using 2017 as a reference. I thank you for your attention, and I'm ready to take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Laurent. It was, for some people, probably a very insightful presentation on the activities of Fluxys, a well-known household name in Belgium, but I know from experience that a lot of people actually do not really know what Fluxys does. Or at least apart from their terminal activities in Zeebrugge. So thank you very much for this. I think we could step straight into the panel debate. And I have a question the same question actually for each and every one of the previous speakers. And Laurent, since you are still there, I can start with you. A short answer is the only thing I require, is hydrogen, because everyone of the previous speakers has touched on the subject of hydrogen. Is hydrogen a fuel or an energy carrier?
I would say hydrogen is certainly an energy carrier, and it can become a fuel if it's liquefied and it becomes liquid. Hydrogen can become a fuel as well in combination with other elements, like if you recombine H2 and CO2, you can easily obtain methanol. If you recombine hydrogen with nitrogen, you can easily obtain ammonia. So that's the good point about hydrogen. It is not only to be used in gaseous form, it has really a multiplicity of possible applications. Sorry, I wasn't so short.
No, that's okay. That's why a short question sometimes deserves a long answer. I don't know if we can still reach Nathalie. Nathalie, are you still there?
Yes.
Nathalie.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Well, so I would love to hear what is it for you? Is hydrogen? Is it a fuel or is it an energy carrier?
I think first it's an energy carrier, because I think it will be mainly used with green hydrogen. If we talk about green hydrogen, it will be produced with intermittent green energy, so transformed into an energy carrier then. And then it potentially can be used as fuel.
Yeah. Is Marjolein still there?
Yes, she is.
So Marjolein, I think you threw a few, or you let a few balloons flew in the air during your presentation. So maybe you can puzzle us a little bit more with the answer to the question for you. Is hydrogen a fuel or is it an energy carrier?
Well, if there's going to be a balloon, then I would say it depends on the solution you're looking for. If I look at the larger ship owners, seagoing vessels, I would say an energy carrier.
Energy carrier. And Piet, last but not least.
I think similar to the previous speakers, it's in the first place an energy carrier, but I think it will be, if you bring it to ammonia or methanol, for sure, be a fuel. Because hydrogen on itself needs quite some space, so it's not sure for longer distance traveling ships, sailing ships, that it's a feasible solution. But anyhow, I think being able to use combustion engines is a key advantage. I think in adaptation and use of that energy form, I think fuel cells will probably have a longer adoption time. You see how fast, for instance, BeHydro has developed the hydrogen-based engine, which is based on very new, 100 years old combustion technology.
Absolutely, but if we go there and then we can do the circle around in the other direction. So, Piet, what is then the best option? Should we then go for electricity and batteries, or shall we then use hydrogen to produce electricity?
I think boats will have their electricity is of course a very high level of energy form. I think both will have their place, and I think it's for long distance sailing. Batteries will be no solution. It's very hard to keep the quality and the storage on the longer term, while for hydrogen that's much more easy. But of course, for more specific applications, onshore, electricity will be a main driver. If you look to cars, it will not be easy to bring hydrogen in competition with electricity. So molecules will have their position, but it will be a fight to find that market in certain areas where there is a green zone. I think shipping is quite obvious.
Yeah. Marjolein, what do you think?
Oh, I would plea for an energy mix. If we look at the fleet of Europe, we have quite a diverse fleet. I think that is a strength, and you should strengthen that fleet, and you do that by looking at what the vessel does. If I look at, I used to work for a shipbuilding company. If you look at work vessels, offshore vessels, dredging vessels, and I think there are some speakers that know more about that than I do, but they require something different than tankers or dry cargo vessels. So let's make sure that now we are investing in the future, we make sure that there is an energy mix available in ports.
Perfect. Yeah, and Nathalie, of course, I can come to you because you are, of course, in the midst of these things. So will the windmills that DEME has built be used for producing electricity, which is difficult to transport over long distances and storages, or will we use the windmills to produce hydrogen? What do you think?
We will definitely not do one or the other. I think it's a matter of combinations and looking further than what we are looking at the moment. The future will really be a combination of both. You will have production of electricity, but you will have vast amounts of intermittent electricity being produced at the same time, and no way to store them, and then helping part of that being transferred into an energy carrier such as hydrogen can actually help, and you would be able to combine both. You would be able to use the electricity, most of the renewable electricity directly, as we are doing at the moment today, and you would be able to use the hydrogen which is produced in harder to abate areas and areas of the economy that are a lot more difficult to electrify. So it will be and not or.
Yeah, so from pipeline wars, we will now move on to grid wars, but that's another story and for another debate. Laurent, then for you, I have two questions because we're running towards the end of our first one. Laurent is, of course, the answer to the previous, or to the same question as your predecessors have answered. And for you, then I have an ultimate last question that has come in from the audience. So the floor is yours, Laurent.
Okay, before discovering the special one, then I think in terms of energy mix, I have the same answer as Marjolein. I think we will need a well-balanced energy mix, and we shouldn't close any options too quickly. I think for the time being, there is an answer provided in terms of maritime applications, thanks to LNG or so liquefied natural gas or liquefied biogas, which can already alleviate some of the issues posed by CO2 emissions and by air pollution, which shouldn't be neglected. So I think there is no silver bullet. We will need electricity, of course, but we will need molecules for the simple reason that storage costs for electricity are still awfully high, and you can only store very small amounts of energy. To give you a quick idea, the cost of batteries are now around 150,000 euro per megawatt. The cost of storing gas in Belgium is €6 per megawatt, to give you an order of magnitude. The quantity of gas we can store in the underground in Belgium, where we have a rather limited amount of volume, it's 8,000 gigawatt hour. Yeah. In the system in Belgium, electricity, then you can store something like 1 point and something gigawatt hour. So it gives you a little bit the order of magnitude, but of course the technology will evolve. And so again, we shouldn't close any doors too quickly. Let us examine all energy carriers, and then I think time will tell.
Thank you. And the mystery question is actually one that we should maybe have asked completely in the beginning when we started to talk about hydrogen. Someone from the audience asked, and I think you're the best person placed to answer, is hydrogen safe?
The answer is clearly yes, a frank and massive yes. So let us forget about the Zeppelin catastrophe in the early days of hydrogen. Hydrogen is a product we know. We have transported hydrogen in our pipelines in the early days of district gas, because before moving gas coming from the Netherlands, we moved the so-called city gas or coke gas. Yeah. And you know what? The main constituents of coke gas is hydrogen with 60%. Yep. So the product is known. But I think it's a very valid and important question, because what we need to do is we need to prove a safety case for hydrogen, because there is the aspect of cost, which is important, but I think we need to convince people that hydrogen is a safe energy carrier. Reason why we are carrying a study I didn't mention in my presentation, but together with National Grid and DNV in the northern part of England, in Spade Adam, where we are going to, or they are going to build really a grid, and they are going to move hydrogen around. They are going to test everything, pipelines, they are going to test valves, compressors, metering stations, etc. So we have worked with firefighting brigades. We have established safety cards with regard to hydrogen. And I would say hydrogen is as safe to transport as natural gas.
Then I thank you very much, Laurent. I knew you were the right man to answer this question when Anne started whispering to me that there was a question from the audience. I think this concludes the session. We were allowed to run a little over time, and there are, of course, no commercials in between these sessions, but I would like to entice you, for the people in the audience, to attend then at 5 o'clock the Innovation Awards organized by the Blue Cluster. And then the only thing that remains to me as the moderator and the chair of this session is to thank Marjolein, to thank Nathalie, to thank Piet, and to thank you, Laurent, for your valuable time and your insights. I think this is quite a good session. Thank you very much, and let's not forget, I firmly believe that our future lies on, in, and at sea. Thank you.